She stood above the reef as if the whole bay had spoken first to her. Ryan kicked the skiff rope when the wind changed, and cold spray hit his face like thrown sand. Behind him, old Nessa called from the rocks, "Not today." Men near the landing turned their heads. Why did a widow with salt white hair think she could halt the bay? He laughed so others would hear. His basket of limpets hung light against his hip, and that made his voice sharp. "You stop boats now, Nessa. Shall we ask your gulls for the price of fish as well?" The widow did not step down from the black ledge. She stood with her shawl pulled tight and watched the far water, not him. "Launch after moonrise," she said. "The second swell is late. It will strike the reef mouth hard." Ryan spat into the foam and hauled at the rope. He wanted his skiff beyond the kelp before noon. The settlement needed mussels, peepus, anything with flesh inside a shell, and he wanted the others to see that his hands fed his mother now. Since his father's cough took him in winter, pity had followed the family like smoke. Old Jory, who owned the larger net boat, paused with one foot on the gunwale. The tar on his sleeves shone dark in the gray light. "She has watched this coast longer than you have breathed," he muttered. Ryan shoved the skiff forward. "Then she has had longer to frighten people." The first swell lifted him cleanly. He grinned back toward shore. The second came from an angle no one expected. It rose beyond the reef teeth, folded on itself, and slammed the skiff broadside. Wood cracked. Brine filled his nose and mouth. He heard shouts from the landing and the hard clatter of oars dropped on stone. Hands dragged him through white water before the current took him out. When he coughed himself empty on the rocks, old Nessa knelt beside him. Her palm pressed once between his shoulders, steady as a hammer on a peg. She said nothing. That silence burned more than the salt. By evening, no boat had launched. Wind scraped the roofs. The fish racks hung bare. Children waited with bowls that smelled only of hot water and smoke, and for the first time Ryan looked at the widow on the headland and felt not scorn, but a hard, unwelcome question. The week of empty nets. For 6 days the bay gave almost nothing. The few fish brought in were thin and silver as knives, not enough for all the mouths in the settlement. Women scraped the last meal from flour sacks. Men walked farther along the shore and returned with faces set flat, their boots stained by wheat and mud. When the racks stood bare, even the loudest men leaned in to listen. Ryan went out only in the shallows now. He pried abalone from rock with sore fingers and found half the usual number. Even the gulls sounded lean. Their cries came sharp over the water, then broke off as if the air itself had gone hungry. At dusk, people gathered near the smokehouse where old Nessa often sat mending line no one had asked her to mend. Her husband had drowned 12 years earlier beyond Seal Rock. Since then she had lived alone in a hut patched with sailcloth, speaking little, watching much. Some came to her for the tide. Others came only because fear drove them where pride would not. Jory spread a chart on an upturned crate, though the paper had long ceased to help him. "Fish have shifted," he said. "The current runs wrong along the outer reef." Nessa shook her head. "Not wrong. Changed." Ryan heard the murmur that followed. He stepped forward before he had chosen the words. "Changed because you say so." Several people looked down. No one liked boldness near hunger. Hunger made each sentence heavier than a stone. Nessa lifted a basket from beside her stool. Inside lay white shells, smooth pebbles, and 3 gull feathers tied with thread. She set them on the crate beside the useless chart. Ryan almost smiled at the sight. Then he saw that the pebbles sat in careful lines, each line curved like the bay itself. "My husband marked tides with stones when his eyes grew weak," she said. "After he was gone, I kept the count." She moved one shell a finger width east. "The moon has dragged the night tide farther than men expect. The cold stream now cuts under the warm one near the reef mouth. Small fish turn away from crossing water. Bigger fish follow them. Stones know that." Ryan asked. "No, I do." Her voice held no anger. That made him flush. A child began to cry nearby, thin and tired. His mother pulled him close and rubbed his back through a shirt gone soft at the elbows. The meeting fell quiet. No one cared whether Nessa sounded wise or foolish. They cared about the pot waiting at home. That silence changed the shape of the evening. Ryan saw Jory's broad hands tremble before he hid them under the crate. He saw his own mother standing near the doorway, chin raised, so her son would not read worry in her face. The bay had stripped them all to the same need. Nessa gathered the gull feathers and looked toward the darkening headland. "Tomorrow night the moon rises clear. If I am wrong, say it before all of you. If I am right, stop wasting boats against the reef. Where will you be?" Jory asked. Walking. Ryan should have gone home. Instead, after moonrise, he kept to the marram grass above the shore and watched Nessa leave her hut with a lantern hooded in cloth. She moved slowly at first, then with the sure pace of someone following marks no one else could see. The tide hissed below. Wet weed gave off a sour, living smell. She did not take the church path or the cart track. She crossed the headland toward the broken shelves of rock where few people walked at night. Ryan followed at a distance, his boots slipping on chalky ground, his pride now mixed with something colder. If she played a trick on the settlement, he would learn how. If she spoke to no one and still knew the sea, that might trouble him more. Moon marks in the pools. Nessa climbed down a narrow crack in the cliff and reached a shelf of rock glazed by the retreating tide. Ryan crouched behind a bank of scrub and watched her kneel beside a pool bright with moonlight. She did not whisper over it. She dipped 2 fingers in, lifted them, and rubbed the water between thumb and skin as if testing cloth. In the pooled light between stones, the bay gave up its quiet signs. Then she looked up, not at the sky alone, at the flight of terns turning beyond the reef, at the dark line where foam ran fast, then slowed, at the gleam on a wet stone that vanished when a thin cloud crossed the moon. She took from her pocket a small strip of wood notched with cuts. She laid it flat, lined one end with a crack in the rock, and waited through 2 full breaths before moving it again. Ryan edged closer until he could hear the pool ticking as trapped water slipped back to sea. Nessa spoke without turning. If you mean to spy, come where your knees will not shake the stones. He froze, then climbed down, shamed by the ease with which she had known. Up close, her lantern smelled of whale oil and old iron. The sleeve of her dress was patched at the wrist with cloth from a flour bag. You want to catch me doing charms, she said. I want to know why men obey you. They do not. Men obey weather when it hits their boats. She pointed with the notched strip. Look there. He saw only a lane of moving silver. Then his eyes settled. One band of water crossed another and left a seam, fine as stitching. Bits of weed spun at that seam and fled north. The cold stream, she said. Feel the pool. He put his hand in. One side bit his skin with chill. The other held the day's warmth. He pulled back, startled. Fish feed where those waters meet, unless the sea floor rises too sharply, she said. Hear that? At first he heard surf and wind. Then he caught a hollow knocking under the main rush, steady and low. The reef mouth. Water strikes stone below, then folds back. Tomorrow that fold shifts east. Boats can pass south of it after dawn. Nets should set near the kelp beds off Gull Point by noon. Ryan stared at her hands. The nails were broken short. The knuckles swelled from age and work. No glow came from them, no trick, no hidden sign but use. Who taught you? He asked. My husband began it. Grief finished it. She said the words as one might set down a bucket. Plainly, carefully. For a while neither spoke. The moon cast their shadows long across the rock. Somewhere inland a dog barked twice and fell still. My son was 3 when my husband drowned, Nessa said. He woke hungry before dawn for half a year. So I learned what the sea said before daylight. Not because I loved wisdom. Because I could not bear to watch him lick an empty spoon. Ryan looked down at the pool. He pictured his own mother pretending she had eaten already so he could take the larger share. The thought made his throat tighten. Nessa moved to another pool farther along the ledge. She showed him tiny shrimp facing one way in the current. She showed him limpets gripping high on the rock before rough water. She held up a gull feather and let the wind choose its fall. Each sign was small. Together they formed a map more exact than any chart Jory owned. By the time cloud covered the moon, Ryan's boots were wet through and his mind had gone quiet. He had come to unmask a fraud. He found instead a craft built from years no one had honored because the hands were old and the voice belonged to a widow. When they climbed back to the headland, Nessa stopped him. You may tell them what you saw, she said. Or keep your pride and say nothing. The sea does not care. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Speech had grown costly. He had spent too much already. The morning of the 3rd swell. Ryan slept little. Before dawn, wind tapped the shutters like fingers. He rose to find his mother already awake, tying her kerchief in the dark. She set the last heel of bread on the table and pushed it toward him. Her warning crossed water faster than pride ever had. You eat, he said. I did. He knew she had not. He broke the bread in 2 and waited until she took her half. Neither spoke of why the house had grown careful with food. No family needed words for that. On the shore, The men argued before the light had cleared the horizon. Jory wanted to risk the outer grounds. 2 younger fishers wanted to head north. Others had no plan at all, only fear of wasting another day. Nessa arrived with her shawl pinned tight. Ryan stepped beside her before he could lose his nerve. "She is right," he said. The landing went still. Someone gave a short laugh, thinking he mocked her again. Ryan faced the water and forced himself to continue. "I followed her last night. I saw the crossing stream in the pools. I heard the reef mouth. The pass south of the fold will open after dawn." He turned toward Jory. "Set your nets by Gull Point at noon, not before." One of the younger men scowled. "Now the boy speaks for tides too." "No," said Ryan, "I speak from my own foolish tongue." That landed harder than any boast. Nessa glanced at him once, and though her face scarcely changed, he felt the space between them shift. The boats pushed out in a line when the first clear band of light showed over the sea. Ryan rowed with Jory, bailing as spray came over the bow. His palms sweated against the oar wood though the air bit cold. They passed south of the reef mouth, where foam curled but did not break. To the north, beyond the old route, water heaved in thick-backed rolls. One swell struck the reef there and burst high as a white wall. No one laughed after that. By noon they reached Gull Point. Turns wheeled low and sharp over a patch of water darker than the rest. Jory dropped the net. The float line jerked at once. Men leaned, hauled, reset, and hauled again. Silver flashed in the mesh. Mullet thudded into the hull. A boy in the next boat cried out so loudly the sound skipped over the bay. Relief moved among them with rough hands and wet faces. No one sang. They worked too hard for that. But shoulders lifted, backs straightened. The sound of fish striking wood was better than any hymn to hungry people. Then Ryan saw what Nessa had meant by the third swell. Beyond the point, a cargo cutter from Adelaide stood toward the bay, late to read the water and too committed to turn quickly. Its sail bellied in a crosswind. From where Ryan sat, he could see the line of hidden stone where the shifted fold would drive it if the captain held course. Ryan sprang up so fast the boat rocked. "They do not know." Jory followed his gaze and cursed under his breath. Distance swallowed any shout. The cutter kept coming. On shore, Nessa had climbed the signal post beside the landing. She snatched down 2 drying sheets from a line and tied one above the other on the spar. Then she dropped the upper sheet and raised it again in a broken rhythm, not the harbor signal men used for fair water but an older warning the whalers had once read off this coast. The cutter did not answer. Ryan grabbed a spare oar and stood it upright, then swept it low and east in the same rhythm. Another boat copied him, then another. Soon 3 skiffs flashed the warning together against the dark water. For one stretched moment nothing changed. Then the cutter's yard swung. Sail snapped. The vessel heeled away from the hidden line of stone just as a heavy swell rose where its keel had aimed. White water burst there like torn cloth. Men on the cutter stared toward the fishing boats and the woman on the signal post, small as a nail against the sky. When the danger passed, Jory exhaled through his teeth. "She kept more than our nets." Ryan looked shoreward. Nessa still held the line in both hands. Wind pressed her dress against her legs. She looked frail from a distance. She did not look frail to him anymore. What the bay remembered the catch fed the settlement for 3 days, then for 6 after smoking and salting. People moved with purpose again. Knives rang on tables. Fires burned under iron pots. The smell of fish and wood smoke drifted between huts and settled into clothes, hair, blankets. It was the smell of not being afraid for one more night. The bay changed no faster than before, but now 2 people listened. Men spoke Nessa's name without a smile tucked behind it. Women began sending children to carry water to her hut. Jory fixed her broken gait before she asked. Such acts would have amused Ryan once. Now he noticed how carefully she accepted them, as if too much gratitude could sting as sharply as scorn. He went to her at dusk with a fresh line and the notched strip of wood he had carved for himself. "I cut the marks where I thought you placed yours," he said. Nessa took the strip, turned it once in her hand, and returned it. "Then you placed them in your own way." "Good." He stood awkwardly, feeling larger than the doorway and younger than he liked. "I spoke badly of you." "You did. I wanted men to hear me." "That is common at your age." She set a kettle near the coals. "Hearing is rarer." Ryan almost smiled. "Will you show me again?" Nessa looked past him toward the bay, where evening wind brushed the surface into dark scales. "I will show you until your own eyes begin to work harder than your tongue." So he returned night after night. The coast entered him by pieces. He learned the smell that rose from weed beds before a southerly. He learned how oyster shells opened wider on mild nights. He learned that cormorants flew low and direct when bait fish packed tight, but spread and circled when larger hunters drove from below. Nessa asked few questions. She made him name what he saw, then name what changed, then say what that change might cost if read poorly. Some evenings they spoke of her husband. Not in grand words. She would point to a notch cut in an old post, or to a knot in rope tied a certain way, and his shape would stand among them for a moment. On other evenings they spoke of nothing but current, moon, and stone. Grief lived there too, only quieter. When spring settled and the swells gentled, Jory asked Ryan for his opinion before launching. The first time it happened, heat rose up his neck. He almost answered too fast. Then he heard Nessa clear her throat behind him and held still long enough to watch the foam line by the reef. "Wait half an hour," he said. They waited. A hidden chop passed. The channel eased. No one cheered. That suited him. Months later, children began calling the headland Nessa's Watch. The name stuck because it fit the tongue in the place. Yet Ryan knew the truth of it. She did not keep the tide by command. No one commanded it. She kept watch over the narrow space where human haste met the sea's old patterns, and she guarded that space with patience paid for by loss. On the evening of the first full catch after winter, the settlement ate by the shore. Bowls steamed in the cold air. The cutter captain, now wiser and humbler, sent down a coil of good rope in thanks. Jory raised a cup of tea toward Nessa. Others followed. Ryan said nothing. He took his bowl to the edge of the rocks and looked out where two currents met in a pale seam under the moon. Beside him, Nessa settled with a soft grunt and wrapped her shawl tighter. "Do you hear it?" she asked. The sea rolled over the reef mouth and struck deep stone below. The note came low and hollow, steady as breath. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. That was enough. Far behind them, children laughed with full mouths. In front of them, the tide turned with its old strength, and neither young pride nor old grief could stop it. Yet one could listen, and by listening, keep others from breaking where the water bent.